The Copenhagen Climate Conference is the biggest environmental meeting in more than a decade. Environmentalists from all over the world are planning for urgent action to be taken against global warming. And joining me to help talk about this conference is Senator Jim Inhofe. Senator, thanks so much for joining me.
Nice to be with you.
So I know you're going to Copenhagen, and your views are a little bit different than a lot of the other people that are going over there. Why are you going to Copenhagen?
Oh, I'm going. I actually went to one of these before in 2003 in Milan, Italy. I'm going over because I fear that if some of the individuals like Senator Boxer or Senator Kerry go over and they say what we are going to do in the United States, I have a feeling it's going to be something we're not going to do. Then, of course, with the president going over and saying we're hereby committed to a 17% reduction in emissions by 2020, I have to say, no, that isn't true. America is not going to do that. I think it'd be unfair for 192 countries to go back home thinking that America is going to do something that we're not going to do.
And what specifically do you think is wrong with the agenda at Copenhagen?
Well, the agenda is they have all people who think alike, and many of the people representing countries really don't care about the agenda. It's the biggest party of the year. Right now, the biggest problem is they're running out of caviar and champagne. So in a lot of these countries, that's the only reason they're going, just for the party. The agenda there is to try to put together, something, some accord that everyone could agree with. That isn't going to happen now because it's a foregone conclusion that that will be a failure in Copenhagen. So now they're going to try to plan for something for 2010 in Mexico City.
And I want to ask you about the Climategate scandal. It's been called the biggest scientific scandal of our generation. What was your reaction to it?
Well, I'm glad that was you're quoting the UK Telegraph, and that's an accurate. And I could quote many others too. Well, here's what I think about it. I gave a speech 4 years ago on the Senate floor because all the scientists had come to me and said, you know, they won't air our side of the view. The whole thing is cooked. And so I gave a speech on the floor outlining what they were doing to manipulate all the data that they're basing this on and how they're hiding this stuff from other scientists. And sure enough, when Climategate came, those emails said exactly what I predicted 4 years ago on the Senate floor. So I think it's a scandal. It's a scandal, the dimensions I've never seen, I guess, in my lifetime, that they would do this. And now they're going to try to base policies in the United States on the IPCC science that has been debunked already. So we're going to fight the battle here.
But what do you think about, Al Gore basically dismissed these emails. He said they were taken out of context. It happened more than 10 years ago. What do you think about that?
Well, Al Gore, keep in mind, Al Gore is the big winner on this. And he has actually made hundreds of millions of dollars on this scam. And, of course, he has to say that. There wouldn't be any and he's not exactly, after having made it's something close to $1 billion, I understand. And after that, you don't expect him to come along and say, oh, well, it's all over now because of, so I would expect that. And there are a lot of people trying to play it down. I would say this. The Guardian, which is an environmental activist group, said pretending this is not a real crisis isn't going to make it go away. And the Atlantic Monthly, the stink of intellectual corruption is overpowering. This is really a scandal. And it's kind of ironic that it came out when it did, because now people realize. And there's so many people who are well-meaning people for 15 years have talked about this, and now they realize that the science was cooked.
Well, maybe it proves that the science was cooked and maybe that the scientists themselves were unethical, but does it prove that global warming isn't true?
Well, if the global warming is consensus, as they call it, is based on the IPCC science, then yes, you'd certainly have to question that. I've always said that there is a relationship between man-made gases, CO2, and the weather, not necessarily whatever word you want to use for it, global warming. But it's so small, it's hardly measurable. In fact, it was Al Gore's scientist, his Tom Wigley, who said if all nations did this restriction, it would only, all developed nations, it would only reduce the temperature by 7/100ths of 1 degree Celsius. Now, that's not even measurable. So since this is something that would cost the American people between $300 and $400 billion a year, and not to get any results, I cannot conscientiously support it. And there are more and more senators who feel the same way. Many Democrat senators now have joined on, so there's just not the support in America to pass something.
And so what's the motivation behind all of this? I mean, why are the scientists doing this? Why are the politicians, as you say, cooking the science then? What's their motivation?
Well, I've always thought a lot of it had to do with, see, this all started with the United Nations. It was certainly a lot of people in the United Nations don't like to be accountable to any countries. Perhaps that had something to do with it. Then you have the far left, the extremists, the MoveOn.org, the George Soros, the Michael Moore. These are that's where all the money is. And this is what I call the Hollywood elites. And those people out there are very, very liberal, and they're famous for trying to manage everybody else's life except their own.